most interesting sessions I saw in the list of ideation sessions. So looking forward to it. And with that, over to you, Katrina.
Awesome. Thanks, Shireen. I'm going to put in the chat a link to Mural, which we're going to be working in today. So we'll take some time to get everyone in there, and then I'll pass it over to Sebastian to introduce us to Mural and get our brains moving. So all you'll need to do, if anyone has not used Mural on this call, you just need to click on the link and it will open, and you just enter your name, and you'll see this big, great board, which is Mural. And think about it like a big whiteboard. If we were in a room together, being able to write on a whiteboard and put sticky notes down, Mural lets us do that from our homes. So we can all be sitting here and doing that and seeing what people are writing in real time. So I see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. I see 6 in here. I think we're waiting just for a couple more people, and then
Yes.
we can get started.
Yeah, I see animals here. See a bunny, a turtle. Okay, so let me talk to you about how to use Mural. So many of you maybe are familiar with the tool, but for those of you that are not familiar, what we want to do is use sticky notes here. So for you to make a sticky note, just double click in the board and you'll be able to create the sticky note. You can resize it, you can change the color if you want a different color, if you want to go green, blue, so you can do that. So let's give it a try. So for all of you that are in the board, let's do that. Perfect. I see different shapes. An hexagon. Nice.
Got some nice colors going too. See, a little rainbow here.
It's flash for colors.
Awesome. Anyone have any questions about Mural before we move to the next? No? I think we're all experts by this point, right? 9 sessions in.
Perfect. So now that we know how to use Mural, let's I'm gonna summon you here. So now we want to know what you think about non-traditional units, what that concept means to you. So before everything else, before we're gonna start the session, we want to know that. So let's go here. We want to hear from you what you think is a non-traditional unit. So everything that comes to mind, just put it there in a sticky note. So we're gonna give you 1 minute to do that. So yeah, let's do that now.
I'll set the timer right now for you.
Perfect.
So really, when you saw this session and you came to join it, or when you were creating this session for Scotia Bank people here, what were you thinking of? What comes to mind just instantly?
Okay, time's up. So let's see, what do you have here? We have friendship. So people think about religion, tradition, students sharing apartment, sharing financial goals. Okay, so really good ideas. I think that we are close from what I also was thinking. So that's interesting too. So now that we know.
Wait, did I see just pawn shop? That's interesting. Pawn shop? Pawn shop.
Yeah.
What's the point of you on there? That's an interesting one. Who put that? Sorry. I'm finger pointing. I shouldn't do that. Who is it? And what do you mean by this? I guess the person wants to remain anonymous. I see. Okay. Let's keep going forward. Sorry. I was really surprised to see it. I like it.
The secrecy.
Yeah,
Great, nice.
I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of the same themes, right? Friendship, like communal living, a non-traditional family structure, beyond that nuclear family. Yeah, I think we're all in the right mindset here. So some of us have had coffee in this time zone. Some of us, it's sounding great. So why don't we maybe move to our speakers? Well, maybe we'll give you an overview of what we're going to do, and then we'll pass it over to you. So today we're going to go through a couple different use cases and a different persona of, someone who's in a non-traditional unit. And we'll just kind of have a great discussion on it. We want you to ask questions, so please feel free to ask them and unmute yourself or put it in the chat, and we'll be sure to talk about it. And then we'll go through that persona. We'll figure out what they're thinking, feeling, doing. We'll try and kind of frame like the problem statement, what we're really trying to solve here. And then we'll start to figure out what that gain would be for the persona and what we can create to make their lives amazing and perfect and solve all their problems. We hope so. So with that, why don't we pass it over to Anita and Christina, and you can please introduce the problem statement, how you got to this, what you were thinking.
Thank you. Yes, we're happy to. Good morning. And I think that we would like to share just a short deck that we put together for just to kind of a little bit of that. And I think actually just to note that inside of this deck, we have live links. And I don't know, are we in PowerPoint live mode, Anita, where you can actually link through the screen on it, or what? Otherwise, what we're going to do is just share this in the chat for anybody who wants to use it as a reference moving forward. No, the live links don't work. Okay.
Oh, okay. We can share the PDF.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for having us. We, Anita and I work inside of Scotia Bank. We are part of the design community of practice, and each of us have a little bit of a different role. So Anita is Director of Product Design, working really closely with product teams to launch things from our roadmap, products and service related. And I work actually as part of a research and operations team. So I lead a strategic foresight team looking at long-term planning, and also a design and product operations team that really helps to kind of deliver reporting and different mechanisms to make all of our jobs easier. So that's a little bit about us. And we are both just personally interested in this space of supporting non-traditional group banking experiences. And so we've framed up a problem on slide 2 to look at the particular area of interest that we have been discussing, which is this problem statement. So I will read that out. It is: formal and informal relationship configurations are changing. Traditional banking products and services no longer provide accessible ways for non-traditional customer units to bank together. So how might we address non-traditional customer units and their diverse needs to better reflect services that transcend the traditional criteria? So we know that in the banking domain, there is a lot of legacy mechanisms there that sort of prohibit a lot of different types of social configurations from being able to achieve things together in the same way that a married couple, a legally recognized union would be able to. So here we want to make some space to really be able to think about, when we're saying non-traditional, it's sort of like much more open-ended, across a spectrum, non-binary, sort of either identifying ways of being or actually interacting. So moving on to the next slide, we had started to think about what types of users might we want to consider in this space. And we think that this is a really great opportunity to hear from some of the hackers around additional use cases that you can think of for sure. But we just wanted to give you a few examples of things that we feel like there's a lot of room for opportunity in terms of service delivery. So non-traditional or non-legally recognized relationships would be one. Co-parenting, we have continue to have quite a different definition of what family can look like, and co-parenting is one that we're going to get into a little bit. The power of attorney. So we have a very high aging population. We're having what some are calling a tidal wave of baby boomers coming into a place in their lives where they need a lot of support from their children and grandchildren, and health implications there. So how are we really supporting people who are taking on financial responsibilities for family members or friends that they never had before, and having to make sure that they can deliver against that? Platonic relationships, so really recognizing that something like the housing market is very difficult to get into, and so people are often looking to opportunities to pool money together and see what they might be able to accomplish in terms of their goals and objectives. And then with roommates, so roommates, maybe a long time ago would look more like a university or college roommate. And now roommates are being sort of seen as a lifelong situation, and even elderly people returning to roommate situations when they retire in order to save money and actually have social interactions be more available to them. So lots of great space and opportunity to think about it. And if there's something that you feel passionate about inside of some of these use cases, that might be the direction to go for you. So the next slide, we're going to walk you through 3 different use cases that we wanted to sort of propose. And what we wanted to do for you is really kind of give you that tactile use case persona that you might be able to use and really think about in terms of solutioning for. So I'll just go ahead and read this out. The first theme that we looked at is caregiving and money management. So Peter has the power of attorney for his uncle who is currently in long-term care, treated with early stage Alzheimer's. The way Peter has been managing the money changes with time as the disease progresses and his uncle has less ability. Peter wants to ensure he can continue to pay for the rising costs and needs of his uncle's care. Having full control of his uncle's money is a very big deal for him, and he wants to manage it carefully. He wishes he could do more money management online and get advice from a money manager that understands and has experience in his situation. So some of the things that we've been looking at here is preparing for end of life matters digitally. So there's the bottom part here is just sort of services that we've come across in the space or realm of what of this type of use case, and examples of ways that things are starting to pop up to meet some of the needs that are emerging for these users. So willful power of attorney is an online access to be able to create some of those binding legal resources that you would need in order to facilitate something like this for a loved one. Bill sharing is another great example. So, if you were in Peter's position and you might be living with the uncle taking care of him, but not using all of his uncle's money in order to pay for all the needs of the household, some of them on your own, you might want to use something like a Splitwise to be able to really kind of track how you're managing the money. And then also lots of helping hands. So someone in Peter's position might need a lot of support from other family members. And so this is a platform that has emerged, which has a shared model of care, which invites family and friends to be able to identify ways that they can help a loved one in a situation. Now I'm going to pass it to Anita to walk you through the additional use cases.
Thanks, Christina. So the next one we're looking at is sort of around the theme of co-parenting or child finances. So I'll sort of do the same thing and read out our scenario here. So May has had a difficult divorce and now shares custody of her 2 children with her ex-partner. As part of their agreement, she now has to work with her ex to cover their daughter's evolving expenses. She finds it difficult never knowing what her ex-partner's financial situation is and wishes there are ways to get advice from a third party on their approach to savings and managing their daughter's finances. So what we've listed here are a couple of examples of things that we've noticed in the industry that are starting to address some of these changing needs. The first one is not specific to co-parenting, but this is just new banking options for the LGBTQ+ community, sort of really focusing on some of the needs of this community. And the next 2 are really specific to this co-parenting situation. There's an app that we saw called Co-Parently, which helps parents who may not be in a relationship anymore make decisions and keep track of all of the things that are happening with their child. And then there's another app that we saw called Our Family Wizard that sort of does something similar. It can engage other members of the family in the co-parenting relationship, but these are forums and platforms that folks can use to manage the relationship better and keep things top of mind for folks and sort of keep the conversation focused on that co-parenting and some of the things specific to parenting. And the next example we have is around platonic relationships or investments. So Taylor and Jordan are lifelong friends who share an apartment as roommates. Individually, neither of them feel they can afford a home in the city they live in. Taylor works in the gig economy and has a sporadic income, making it difficult to qualify for a traditional mortgage. And Jordan works for a major national corporation and has great health and dental benefits, but is unable to share these benefits with Taylor, even though they share a home. Together, they would like to invest in a home and create a life together as platonic partners. So this is something that Christina mentioned earlier in the intro, but this is something we're seeing more and more of, especially in cities like Toronto, where we live, where it's becoming increasingly difficult to break into the housing market. And so what we've done here is we've pulled together a couple of articles and examples of things where folks are able to share mortgages or NFTs or home ownership with other folks, whether or not they're in a relationship. There's a lot of examples around banking with friends, squad wealth, or lending peer-to-peer. And then we just also included the Spotify family example here. This is an example of folks who are able to share subscriptions with people. And I know they call it premium family, which sort of goes against the platonic relationship, but I don't think there's anything really stopping platonic friends from sharing their Spotify accounts with each other. So we thought this was a good example to include as well. But all of these are live links to actual articles. So in the PDF, you should be able to click on it and get a little bit more information. Are there questions or comments on anything that we've shared? I think Christina froze and might rejoin.
No problem.
The first thing, I was wondering something, like, where do you think that specifically, like, the industry is failing to address these needs? I mean, we see different types of offering from fintech, like Splitwise, like you were mentioning. When it comes with traditional financial institutions, where do you think that they're falling short to provide these services?
So I think that traditional FIs are just being a little slower than the rest of the industry at even acknowledging some of these relationships and finding solutions for these non-traditional relationships. I think the industry is moving in that direction, but it's not quite there yet. And even things like this example that we're showing here, Jordan and Taylor are creating a life together platonically, but they can't share health and dental benefits. And there's not a lot of, I haven't heard of a lot of insurance companies that give people that ability. And that's just one example where the industry, I think, needs to catch up.
And Anita, jumping off of Sebastian's question there, when you were talking about caregiving and money management, one of the questions I had when we were prepping for this and thinking about some of these use cases, specifically for this one, I was thinking, well, a lot of the time when you have that power of attorney, you're able to go and take control of a bank account and get, access, and you could access a mobile banking application just like you would for yourself, right? It would just be the person that you're helping take care of. So where do you see the problem space here? Like maybe you can kind of dig in a little deeper and tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here, and again, specific to this example, is when it's not a full transition from one person to the other just yet.
Mm.
In this case, I forgot their names. Peter has power of attorney for his uncle. His uncle is in early stage Alzheimer's. He hasn't completely lost his ability to make decisions, to take care of himself, and they're starting to share that responsibility. And what's really interesting here is as the years go by, that shift in responsibility will really naturally move from Peter's uncle towards Peter, but that's an evolving relationship, and it's not, okay, starting tomorrow, Peter is taking over 100% of the conversations and decisions all around his uncle's finances and his medical decisions. And I think that's what's interesting here. And I think that just speaks to the fact that a lot of these relationships aren't black and white and will evolve and change over time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And your overarching statement, about transcending the traditional criteria, maybe you can dive in a little bit deeper about what you and Christina kind of thought about when you were thinking about the traditional criteria here.
Sure. I'm going to just let Christina back in.
Yep.
So I think traditional, when we talk about traditional criteria, I think it's, the very nuclear family, and a lot of banking products and services are still geared towards, a couple with 2 kids, with the single household dual income, and I think what we're trying to explore is opportunities for other kinds of relationships and other kinds of criteria that will help us to determine if somebody's a good customer or not. I think a lot of times, if we're looking at that platonic relationship between Taylor and Jordan, it might be harder for them to get things like a traditional mortgage because they're not in a relationship with each other. It might be difficult for, I don't remember which one it was, but one of them had a job in the gig economy. It might be hard for him or her to get a traditional mortgage because they don't have a traditional job.
And what would you see that traditional criteria being for the co-parenting situation? Because that's, I see it in the platonic relationship that we talked about, and even this kind of caregiving money management situation of who can take ownership in the Alzheimer's example. Where do you see it fitting in here?
Yeah, here I'll jump in, Anita. I think what we're sort of getting at with the co-parenting piece is that there's such a different range of formats that family can look like nowadays, and you might very well be living together, co-parenting, but not in a romantic relationship together, under the same household for whatever reasons that you might have. You might also live in 2 completely different households, and have a great relationship and want to seek to do financial things together. And I think it's more or less just some of the nuances around the flexibility to bend products and services towards what your life looks like, and recognizing that, we have entered a really exciting realm where diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the forefront of a lot of product and service delivery thinking, but we still have a lot of legacy pieces inside of banking as a domain where, fraud and authentication and, really big important parts that make banking secure and trusted are kind of getting mixed up in how people's lives are being shaped and looking like. So it's kind of just recognizing that there's a little bit of a disconnect in what might be possible for somebody in, outside of the square box of nuclear family. Not to say that there isn't any flex existing right now. I mean, banks recognize that people come in all different shapes and sizes, but it's just not as user friendly.
Yeah, I think that differentiation between criteria maybe for this one and just user-friendly or geared towards, that makes sense. That's a great clarification. Anyone else on the call have some more questions for Anita and Christina?
Nothing on my side. I'm actually very interested in this subject. It just something such I never think about it honestly, and it's just such an important thing. That would be actually brilliant for. I love the idea of having like let's say a waitress that doesn't necessarily have insurance, living with someone else, and they could share their insurance. That makes so much sense, right? So especially since the gig economy is getting bigger and bigger, and people have more and more than one. If you go in other countries, it's probably easier, but in the US, it's paramount, right? Without it, doing so much travel. It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a reframe from this is the system, and whoever I am, I have access to only these pieces because it's who I am. And changing that paradigm and that dynamic into I'm a user, what are my needs, and how do I achieve them? And I think that's, I mean, in a broader scale, something that we need to do. But I think inside of the insurance example is a great example of that. Like, let's just, people want insurance and they need insurance. So let's give them insurance in whatever formation makes sense rather than saying, like, you can have access if you look like XYZ, you know?
Especially because looking like XYZ is less relevant anymore, right? I feel like it's almost trying to modernize something that was built for a system that was the way it worked before. But now that people are more independent and have multiple jobs and live in a gig economy, we just have to readapt to what people actually need. It's again starting with the user instead of starting with the services and the offering.
Yeah, like if you think about it from a business perspective, like here we're positioning from a user perspective. We're trying to build empathy towards, you know, different peoples and their circumstances. But if you think about it from a business perspective, the traditional pools which fund the whole system are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So if, you know, we want to be able to maintain all the different types of delivery, scalability, quality, then we have to adjust, right? Like we need to find new markets and new ways of bringing in capital.
Yeah, with the insurance example, it feels like this is kind of a new way that we're all thinking, right? Like you know, how we're kind of changing our perceptions to platonic relationships or how we co-parent, right? Like this is kind of where maybe morphing into a new you know, like each generation gets a little bit more thinking this way and moving this way. So with the insurance example, it feels like maybe this is something that slowly over time we'll start to kind of understand this and gear ourselves towards these kind of different relationships. That's how I'm kind of thinking about it, right?
Yeah, and specifically, I feel that the insurance industry is so slow to move because I think that the banking industry is going there slowly, but it's going there to recognize this type of differences. But the insurance industry is way slower, I think. So it's interesting that we are thinking and talking about this topic too.
I mean, it's a symptom of being a highly regulatory environment. That change takes a lot more time and runway and thoughtfulness to be able to make sure that it's protecting the most vulnerable people.
So do you think that regulation right now is one of the biggest like block roads that we have for this industry to move forward?
I think so. I mean, I think that regulations cannot be left behind. And so it takes a lot of innovation in order to be able to really think about something that can work. But I think that there's always going to be bridges that you can identify into making something possible. And because we have lots of great examples of ways in which, you know, service delivery is changing, it's sort of the time and our responsibility to be able to make those changes inside of the regulatory framework that we hold ourselves accountable to. I don't know. What do you think, Anita?
Yeah, I agree. I think regulations are always going to exist, but I think it's also our responsibility to do what we can and to push any of those regulations forward as people's needs evolve and as you know how we define families or how we define relationships evolves.
Definitely. Any other questions before we jump back to the mural? This was really great, Anita and Christina. I think it gave us a perfect introduction to what we're gonna spend a lot of time to today, and especially thinking about this regulation. I think this was, again, the perfect segue, thinking about regulation, right? And there's only so much we can do there, and as we kind of grow and become more accustomed to these different types of relationships, that's one avenue. But as we were preparing for this, we wanted to kind of take the time to look at just one persona that felt like something right now we can solve for. So they're, kind of putting a lot of these regulations aside, things that we can't control. So we were really interested in looking at the example of the co-parenting. So even though you're not together right now, or you were and now you're trying to co-parent and co-finance together, we kind of wanted to dive in deeper to this persona, since we felt like it was something our hackers could really solve for now. And that there's solutions in the space, but maybe not geared the best they could be towards these groups, right? So we took your second example, or the second use case of someone who had a difficult divorce in the past. So again, it's not over for her because they're trying to cover their expenses together for their daughter, and it's hard to know what her ex-partner's financial situation is, and wishes she could get advice from that third party on savings and managing their daughter's expenses. So this like managing money side of it, advising, visibility, even though they aren't, together anymore, this co-parenting world. So with that, we wanted to just kind of step back for a second and take on the persona of Jolene or whoever this would be, right? And think about like, what would her concerns be and considerations when she's thinking about this problem that she has. So we wanted to do a quick brainstorm here. So within this first section of the Insight 1, what do you think, if you were Jolene, what would your concerns be or considerations within this situation if you were co-parenting with your ex-partner? And I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes so we can start to throw down some sticky notes here and think about what those concerns would be. And just to remind everyone, all you need to do is double click and then start typing, and that's how your sticky note will appear and how you can write down your thought. All right, that's time. So why don't we wrap up our last thoughts? And as we do that, start to read what other people have put in this section.
I love how people were already feeding on each other. We're like transparency, but not too transparent. I don't want people to see who's already going through it. I like it.
And it's funny, it's interesting that we were thinking about the kid too. The child is important in this relationship, so it's important to consider that part of the problem too.
Yeah, as I'm reading this, Pierre, I think you brought up a good point that would be great to discuss, right? This transparency, but not too transparent, or, not totally maybe trusting the ex-partner. So you want this transparency. What do people think about that? If you put something about transparency?
I think it could be transparency in numbers, but not necessarily transparency in detail of everything that's happening. It is important because you need to recreate a trust. Again, I don't know. I haven't been through a divorce myself, but my guess is there is probably some lack of trust that is created, and you need someone in the middle to be able to maintain this trust. And so it could be a bank or anything, but you need to find a way to create trust. And trust is usually not in full transparency, but in enough transparency to create this level of trust. So that's an interesting line to thread, I think.
I put something on transparency. I believe that there are several sides to it. One of them is understanding what her daughter's needs are, and understanding what's the cost of that, because there could be some unpredictable parts and some more consistent parts on the cost, and that's necessary to create the accountability on both sides to support her child.
Yeah, definitely.
It might be also about how old is the child, because the expenses are going to be different, and how you're going to manage those expenses are going to be different, and who is living with the kid. That's something that it is important for this too, I think.
I think there's an element of sort of estate planning as well. If the parents are together and one of them dies, they can usually trust that the other one will take their insurance and money and do what's best for the kid. But if the trust isn't as strong between the two co-parents, and one person dies, what happens?
Wow. Again, I never thought about it. It's very important. I think the mental health of each one is also important. I don't know how to take it into account, but I know that post-divorce, sometimes it goes really well, sometimes it doesn't. And if it goes really bad, then it can have a very strong impact on the mental health of one of the partner. Not only providing the right support to the person, but making sure that the person is able to still get in touch with the kid, of course, and also evolve it over time, right? Because things eventually get better. Making sure that the place of the parent come back to the place it should be after a little while, maybe.
There's also just such a variety of expenses when raising a child. Like it's, you have your financials worked out in the big buckets, but then there's pizza day at school, there's field trips, there's new shoes, there's like all of these expenses that just kind of arise that really add up. And so like some of those kind of smaller, maybe buckets of care could be considered.
Almost like a safety net for unpredicted, a bucket of some whatever happened, like safety net of new activity or anything like that. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I mean, in Canada, I think there was a recent study that said like 50% of Canadians don't have $500 in an emergency fund. Like, so if you think about that, inside of this scenario, it's like, what is the child emergency fund that you might need to keep in concert with each other?
Yeah, that also makes me think about, child support too, right? Like if maybe the ex-partner is paying child support, but that doesn't cover enough, like you're talking about these, pizza day and things always come up like this, right? That's not built into that. Thinking about those types of concerns too is what I would think about. Or, if the ex-partner says, well, I'm paying child support, or, I'm giving you this money, right? Well, pizza day comes up and all these other things are coming up. How do you manage those types of finances?
Yeah,
Or
and I
even
think
just dial it back to child support itself, like just making it easier to get the child support in the mom's hands. Because in America, it's left kind of up to the parties, and then if it doesn't happen, courts get involved, right? So if you just had some way of facilitating that basic payment, it could make lives easier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think there's things around making decisions for the child that could be costly. Like my kid wants to go into hockey. That's not only is that tens of thousands of dollars over the course of their, I don't know, teenage hockey career, but that's also a huge lifestyle change for the parents because they have to bring their kid to hockey practice. And how would they make those decisions together?
Mm.
It's interesting too because it's about the time of how much time is going to spend each parent with this. So who is going to take him to hockey? So some other things that are important in this interaction.
I like the emergency fund also. So I'm going back to this, but I like the almost like a collateral. Like in finance, you have like a collateral pool, right? And you need to keep it collateralized. I feel like we could have something automatic like this, right? Each parents put in, and when the collateral is off, there is like automatic drain that need to just fill up the collateral or something like that. I don't know. I'm already going into solutions. Sorry, Katrina and
I was
Sebastian.
just gonna say,
You're right. You're right.
my my lasers are beaming down on you.
I know. I'm not. I stopped talking. Sorry. I'm sick. Okay, that's why I go straight into solution. I would never do that otherwise.
You get a pass. You get a pass this time. No, I think that's a great idea. Let's park it for, in a half hour when we get there. But I think that's I think you're thinking in the right mindset, right? Any other comments on this about what we have here with our considerations before we take another turn and think about it on a different side? All right, why don't we move down to our next section then, right? So we just thought about Jolene, we thought about all her different concerns and considerations. Now we want to kind of flip it and think about what the bank lacks to help her within this situation, right? So we said she's concerned about all these things and she just doesn't have a solution that helps her and solves these problems. So I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes. And why don't we think about what the bank lacks here to help her in this? All right, that is time. If anyone's still writing, why don't we finish up our last thought and start to look and see what other people have put in this section. Some really interesting thoughts here. Creating incentives to help build trust, or maybe one of the parents can't open an account legally. I think that's something we don't think about, right? If one parent can't open the account or not. If anyone, whoever put that down, if you want to talk about that more, I think it's a very interesting point.
I put that one, and I don't have any specific in mind, but what I believe that we build as financial institutions incentives for example, using your credit card, so or the whole rewards programs. What are the how could we shape the same kind of behavioral incentives to build that trust? To, for example, if they are jointly saving and reaching some goals, they both get benefits. Or if they provide transparency and expenses, the mom, for example, if she's managing the finances for her child, if she provides more transparency, she earns something, or gain something. There's something that promotes that trust building.
Yeah, and I put maybe only one parent can open an account legally. It's just, I mean, I remember coming in the US and not being able to open an account, for example. And I would imagine coming with a child, not being able to open an account would be pretty big, right? Because then basic support wouldn't be provided. The other thing is some people can't open an account anymore as well, right? There is also like a credit scoring mechanism in the US that may impact you. Poor decision making when you are young. I think there is a lot of other things that would impact the capability to open an account. And yeah, and if you think about, I mean, underserved community, there is still a lot of unbanked people in the US. So, right?
It can be even related to the financial situation of one of the parents. What if they are not receiving enough money and they don't have money in their account so they can provide for their child?
Yeah, exactly.
Also seeing this side too, as I'm reading some of these, this side of an advisor as the financial institution, right? We're seeing like the mental health support for customers or experts that help them. So
yeah, I wanted to comment on that because some of the stickies were from me. So I think the model of financial advisors in the branch or online has been heavily focused on your finances. But in a matter like this, there's so much social and familial context that needs to be included in the advice being given. But are the financial advisors really prepared to kind of give that, or do they have the resources and examples and context that they can offer customized advice that is meeting these very direct needs? So I think it's there's some examples of different types of financial advisor models that have been kind of evolving in the banking sphere. So there was a couple of years ago some testing around life coaching as an opportunity for banking to be delivering that on the front lines of work. Some banks in the States were doing it. And so it's kind of like, yeah, what is that kind of like stickiness that we can enable financial advisors to actually give advice to people that really matters and fits the shape and size of their need?
yeah, I think that's huge, right? We're seeing more and more as as we've been running all of these sessions too, this part of banks turning into not only a bank, like they're your partner, right? They're along for the ride way more than just, helping you create an account. So I think that's a really key point in this and interesting to think about.
And I also think it's a mandate of credit union, right? If you think about community market and credit union, their goal is to help the community. Using financial tools, yes, of course, but not only. And I think it's a very specific thing in the US. That's the reason why the market in the US is so diverse. I mean, I know, Katrina, we often talk about credit union, how much we are so happy to bank with credit union, right? But it's also because of this. You actually have a human support behind it. So how could they help more in this kind of situation is a good question. Especially because credit union used to be very traditional in the way they do things. So how could they be more helpful by being less traditional in a way?
Christina and Anita, from your side, are you seeing that the bank is turning to this being a partner more than just a traditional bank? Is that something that you're seeing more of? As Pierre mentions, credit unions are already doing it. Is this something that the bank is also interested in kind of taking on as well?
I think that the bank recognizes lots of opportunities to meet customers where their needs are at. And so I think that there's lots of really good conversation and exploration around being able to drive the right values back to the customers. But also, I think we know what we're good at. And what we're good at isn't the things that we're talking about, right? Like we don't have the expertise, we don't have the experience to be wading into this space. So I think it's just sort of we're in the messy middle of where we can go with it. And I don't necessarily think that we certainly absolutely have not solved it. And that's, why something like this is great for hackers to be able to think about, right? Like we're looking for the right solutions. I don't know, Anita, what would you say?
Yeah, I think I would agree as well. I think we're not doing it well, and not sure if that's going to be our focus moving forward, or not just our bank, but just banks in Canada, like big banks in Canada. But I think there's a lot of opportunities here for other people to sort of lean in and bridge some of the gaps.
Yeah, I think what big banks are really good at is finding the right partner. And I think that's what you're going for, right? It's more like, does the bank need to provide mental health counseling? Maybe not, but maybe they can help you to find the right one. And that's when the partnership became even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that could definitely be an interesting avenue to explore for sure. Like when you don't have the expertise in something, a business model is to acquire it or to partner. And so who would those partners be and what kinds of services would make sense? Or, where are the upskilling opportunities and where are the service delivery provisions that are changing? Like there's so many different ways that it could be pieced together. It doesn't just have to be every financial advisor is now a life coach, which also might be great, but it's certainly not what we're doing right now.
I like the idea.
I'd like to bring a different topic, and it is going into the understanding of child needs. My question here would be, what is the role of the child, of her daughter? At which point she gets involved in her financial life, because this is a lot about supporting her. So what's that transition? She's going to grow. What is that transition, and how can we support that transition as well to bring the tools and the knowledge and the visibility into their financial life to the kid?
Yeah, JJ, I think that's a good point, right? Maybe for the context that we're looking at now, maybe we make the assumption here that, maybe her daughter is 5 years old and this is something that she's not going to be participating in now. But what does that look like when she's 18 or, when she's maybe 16 and thinking about college and they're having that discussion about the college fund, right, between parents and what they're going to do there.
Yeah, it looks almost like it's a service that has to evolve with the age of the kid. So it starts with some specific needs in the beginning, like just expenses, light bills, and all these type of things. But then what happened in the future when he's older, that is going to parties, pizza parties, birthdays, all these type of things. So I do think that it is a really good point.
Even planning for college, right?
Exactly. And how soon you start doing that, and how the product is gonna, or the service is gonna adapt to when the parent is gonna take that decision.
I think it brings also another thing. What if parents have completely different revenue, right? Like one parent is earning much more than the other. What is the share of each one comparing to a goal? Let's say I want my kid to go to an Ivy school or whatever, and that's going to cost a lot of money. Then what should be the percentage of each parent? Is the bank a good mediator here, right? Because the banks know. Let's say let's say my wife is earning like 10 times my salary. I probably don't even know that. She probably doesn't want to make me feel miserable by myself and not telling me, right? But the bank does. So can the bank help to tune that in? That's an interesting mediator role.
And it is interesting because almost that you put in the middle like legal stuff, because that type of discussion is something that people have in court when they are trying to figure out who's gonna do what. So it's almost like the bank is gonna get a middle part in that relationship too.
Any other thoughts that people have after reading what we have in this section? Or anything they want to ask or discuss? Great. Well, looking at this, I think we've really unpacked, right, what Jolene is feeling like and what her concerns and considerations are, and then, thinking about the bank side. So I wanted to move over to our next section here and think about these insights that we just put down, and then try and turn them into some problem statements that we can ideate on. So our first section where we were thinking about these concerns and considerations, I think our main insights were being transparent, but not too transparent. And we also talked about
talking about trust too. I think that was a big one.
Yes, trust and transparency. Is there anything else, these big insights that we took from our first section? Any other things you think we've missed here? I think that sums it up, right? Trust and transparency.
I think that was the biggest one, yeah.
Yep.
I feel like there must be some other stuff also, like mediating role. I don't know if it's only trust, but like a mediator. I don't know how to say that up.
Maybe that's more what the bank is lacking, though. Her consideration more like she was. I think let's add that to the second insight here. But I think that's a great point. But before we move on to the second insight, we started to take a stab at thinking about how we could put these insights into a problem, a problem statement that we could then solve for. So we were thinking about how might we access and manage easy, convenient, and transparent financing resources. That's kind of what Jolene is thinking about here. Maybe we should change this and add trust as well in here. Manage easy, convenient, transparent, and trusting financial resources. What Christina and Anita, what do you think about this, problem here? Is this what you were thinking as you were creating this persona?
I mean, I want to kind of explore where this is going to go. I think I think you can't uncouple convenient, transparent service delivery from this problem for sure. And at the same time, it also kind of complicates it more because you have parties that may or may not have the same points of view or the same need sets that you're working with on, on the same product delivery. So I think it becomes more and more important for transparency to be very absolute if we're delivering in that way. I don't know, Anita, what would you say?
Yeah, I think transparent and trust. I sort of link those together. The other thing I would want to consider is flexibility and evolvability. I don't want to just keep adding adjectives, but I think when we're talking about the daughter being 5, but her needs changing over time, I think, traditionally, at least for myself, I still bank with the same bank I banked with when I was 5. And I think sort of accounting for those evolving and very long-term relationships is important, especially as a bank, because we want to keep that customer for their whole lives.
Yeah, I think this idea of flexibility is really important, Anita.
And flexibility for the circumstances of the arrangement to change, not just the child, but
yeah.
And flexibility also for the child, if you want to keep the child as well in your bank later on. Flexibility for the child to choose what's going to happen after with the bank, right? Creating an entire, I would say, scalable system for both the parents and the child later on.
Yeah, and one thing we hadn't really mentioned earlier, but I'm sort of thinking about now, is also how the co-parenting relationship changes as the co-parents find new partners and have new kids or stepchildren, how those finances get really messy once you have, many more adults making money, but for many different relationships and kids.
Definitely.
It's a good point we've completely ignored. Yeah, very good one.
Yeah. So I've added to this how might we question, how might we access and manage easy, convenient, flexible, and transparent financing resources she can trust? Do we feel like this embodies what we're trying to solve here for Jolene?
I think so.
Great. And why don't we move to, again, our insight 2, right? And what we were looking at with the banks here when we said, what is the bank lacking? Pierre, you brought up this great point, mitigation. They're lacking. We came up with that as being a big point, this mitigation or this third party being in the middle, right? What else were these themes that we saw? Maybe advising.
Like meaningful or contextual advice.
Yes.
And expertise beyond financial products.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if
Sorry. Anita, please go ahead.
I was like, I wonder if there's even a role here for the bank before the split happens. Like the cost of a divorce is, and I have no idea because I've never gone through and I don't know anyone who has, but I assume tens of thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees and all of this. What role can the bank play in helping manage that before it even happens? Because those are additional expenses, buying another house, splitting assets, all of that.
Yeah, maybe we can include something like as mediation. The bank has to have a mediating role in this relationship.
And I want to point to what Ivy wrote down as well in the chat, which is banks might be a single point of failure, right? So, but if I think that's an interesting point too.
Definitely. Thanks for calling that out. I wasn't following the chat. Really great point, Ivy. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'm sure that everyone has heard of JP Morgan Chase's data breach that affected hundreds of millions of customers. And a lot of people had their social security numbers, the really sensitive data and information leaked. So that's one example of how banks can be one single point of failure. But also if their services don't work correctly, if their app fails, something happens and they're not able to process things like transactions and deposits, then it can create kind of this like domino effect of problems for a lot of people's financial situations. So yeah, it's a little bit about what I meant by how banks can be a single point of failure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to think about too within all of this, right? Great point, Ivy. Also, looking at what we put in our insight section for the second section, thinking about the bank and what they lack, we talked a lot about the support that maybe parents don't get when they're new to the country, or they have other circumstances that don't allow them to maybe open an account or have that incentive to be a part of the banking system, or they can't be a part of the banking system. So I think that's something to keep in mind too as we think about this, right? So maybe it's about non-traditional account or non-traditional ways of supporting parents that don't have access to finance. And like this underbanked population that Pierre had commented about too when we were discussing this. So thinking about the insights that we pulled out, right? Being a third party and this mitigation, partner, and having, contextual and meaningful advising and experts beyond that financial product, and then supporting parents who don't have access to maybe banking that they do now, thinking about how might we, so in the bank perspective, how might we provide services to allow non-traditional units to better manage their finances? I think maybe we can add and strengthen this here too, right, with our insights. So maybe how might we provide services to allow non-traditional units to better manage and advise within their finances?
Yeah, I think it could be, I think that there's not only an opportunity to support the end user, but also in this being able to equip the people offering the guidance and advice with the mechanisms that they need to deliver great work. People in those roles, that they want to be able to give meaningful advice to people. They want to be able to help people achieve their goals. And so how might we be able to give them that too?
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. So maybe how might we support and equip banking employees to support this?
Or banks themselves, right? Maybe it doesn't have to be a bank employee. It could be as we said, partnering, or banking employee might be restricted.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we say partners and employees. Does this kind of frame what you were talking about, Christina, here? How might we equip and support partners and banking employees to better advise customers?
Yes, I think so. Leaves lots of space for us to imagine what could be useful.
Perfect. Any other thoughts, comments from the group? How better we can sharpen these and figure out what we want to ideate on? Any other insights we forgot to pull over to this section?
I was almost thinking that the whole thing could be about supporting relationships. So it's almost like how might we help people to support their relationship through financial services.
Mm-hmm. How might we support? Do you want to say that again?
Yeah. How might we give people the opportunity to support their relationships through financial services?
Perfect. Great. Anita and Christina, any other comments on these questions and how we frame them to start to ideate on them? Any other thoughts as you were putting these personas together? Something we may have missed and haven't talked about?
No, I think you're nailing it. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So now that we've kind of, taken our insights, right? We've become Jolene. We've thought about all her problems and considerations. And then we said, okay, from all of that, transparent, but not too transparent, being, you want trust, you want this flexibility. We've come up with this great problem statement now. How might we help her access and manage easy, convenient, flexible, and transparent financing resources that she can trust? So with that and thinking about this, how might we problem? Let's take some time to do a fast ideation and think about what would these gains be for her? So how might she access this? And what does she need to help, equip her and make her feel good about this? So why don't we do a fast ideation here, and I'll set the timer for 3 minutes and think about this in our next section. I will summon you all to this section too. And think about, again, just the gains here. So we're not solutioning yet. We're just thinking about what maybe, what does it need to do before we get to a solution? What does she just need? She needs, like Pierre is saying, this clear visibility. So thinking in that sense. All right, that is time. So let's start to read what other people have put in this section and start to discuss. Does anything pop out to anyone they want to kick this off with, or questions that they see when reading this?
Something interesting that I was reading is about someone was talking about young parents. That's the first time that we talk about that. I think it's interesting. Who wants to share more about what are the needs of those young parents?
So sorry, I was on mute. So I put that in, and I think it goes really well with have prompt over time to consider for the parents as a child age and new milestone emerge. I think it's very similar, right? It's just being, because a lot of people have kids, but I feel like when you have one, you rediscover everything in one shot. It's like you're supposed to learn everything you've learned in like very quickly, and so support mechanism are a bit uneven usually around. So it's maybe knowing what instrument, what's available for the kid over time and so on, and being able to suggest it at the right time would be pretty paramount here.
Interesting too. It kind of, I think it jumps off of Anita's point where she was thinking about flexibility. So we were talking about for the child, for the parent, but also flexibility was as you age, as a parent ages, and what their needs are and what they're thinking and doing. I think it adds to that kind of flexibility point, right?
Totally.
So we're seeing some of the same themes, right? This easy access all the time, visibility, protecting her child's future through insurance made for her situation. That's a really interesting point. I don't think we've talked about the insurance piece within this use case. Does someone want to talk more about that?
I wonder if that might have been Anita and she had to drop off for another meeting.
No problem.
But I think I would assume that she's gesturing towards some of the conversations that we were having earlier, thinking about the idea of the evolving needs of a child and an insurance package within that could look at a lifestyle and lifelong needs basis.
Yeah, again, with like this flexibility component that we've been talking about, definitely.
Can you invest co-pay for an insurance? Like, aren't you supposed to have one person who is in charge of the insurance payment, or could you have two people? I don't even know if that's possible.
You mean like in a healthcare sense, or what do you mean by that?
I mean, even life insurance or anything, right? It's usually one payer for one receiver.
Right.
I don't think we have two payers for one receiver. That's an interesting problematic in itself.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts here too. Partnership with other experts in family context, have prompts over time to consider for the parents as the child ages and new milestones emerge. So again, flexibility and transparency. I think we're seeing that theme over and over again. Any other thoughts or questions that folks have before we move to the next section? Great. Well, why don't we jump to right underneath it, this next section. So thinking about the how might we questions we developed on the bank side. So giving customers the opportunity to support their relationships through financial services, to allow them to better manage their finances and help advise, and equipped and support even just the partners and banking employees to better advise customers. So all of this, thinking about that. Why don't we do the same thing and think about what these gains would be? So I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes again. And let's start to, rapidly ideate on this. So not thinking about what the solution would look like, but more what it would help provide and help support. Great, that's time, and I think we've seen this people stop adding sticky notes. So I think it's perfect timing to look at the board and see what people have put in this section. So start to read what folks have put down, and then we'll discuss a bit. I think we're seeing a lot of the same, similar themes, right? These tools that help people beyond finance help, so beyond, financial product expertise, a community where they get help from other people's experiences. That's interesting. I don't think we've talked about, peer-to-peer support versus, bank to customer. Whoever put that down, do they want to maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, it was me, and I was thinking that when we were talking about this community sense, community banks, so if the banks are working with other people from having to deal with the same problems, what if the bank helps to bring in together these people and talk about the problems? Because sometimes you learn not only from someone is telling you what to do, but you learn from your peers and what they have been doing to solve these problems. So I think that would be an interesting thing to have.
Definitely. Kind of being an ecosystem, right? The bank supports this like ecosystem to connect customers together. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think a theme that's emerging here is discoverability, right? So basically, I think the right tool is great, but if no one is using the tool, it's not working that great, right? So making sure that you can pinpoint who needs the tool and when they need the tool. Because again, I think life is changing. I mean, everything changed over time, right? So maybe I'm banking with I'm banking with you guys today, and I'm super happy with what is happening. But then you see me buying a house, you see me like having a joint account with my partner, for example, and then you see this joint account being closed, but there is a kid involved. Maybe it's time to use some of the data that you have around me and suggest me the right tool to help in my life event situation. I don't know, it's very data driven, but I think it might be interesting.
No, I think that's a great point, thinking about the data side too, right? I also think it kind of moves us to a good next section too, but how can that support it, right, within this discoverability?
Yeah, and even Christina, do you know if you have access to this data, if you have this kind of knowledge?
I'm not sure, to be honest. The data piece is interesting because, there's we're obviously collecting lots of data, but it's not necessarily organized in that way to look at it like that. So I'm not a data expert, so I wouldn't be able to really give a sense of that.
Sounds good. I just was wondering. Because I know that having tool is great, but like even, and I mean, at Finastra, I know we have tools. A good example is we have a tool. I like to make stories of everything, but we have a tool, for example, that says, look, in New York, you can get, I don't know, 30% off Broadway or whatever, right? And we have this stuff that it's supposed to help us find like good deals and everything. I've been in 13 years in New York, I've used it 0 times. Because every time I look online, I'm like, oh, what are the best deal on Broadway? Why? Instead of using it. And it sent me an email recently saying I had 40% off of a Broadway show I went to see, and I had 20% off on it because I didn't know I had those 40% off. So I think communicating about what we have is also a big thing, and being able to pinpoint when to communicate about it as well. Because if they said me every week, look, you have 40% off, I'd be like, okay, just turn it off. I don't want to hear about it anymore, right? So the line between when and how is a big one, I think. And sorry for the stuffy nose discussion. I'm off camera because I'm just very sick and my eyes are crying the entire time. So please don't take it personally at all.
No, I think that's a great point, Pierre. Thank you for saying it through a stuffy nose. Any other thoughts or comments here within this section? We've, kind of come up with this theme of discoverability, support, community, and ecosystem. I'm seeing more about like making these tools easily discoverable, or, maybe it's a portal there. Incentives. I think JJ, you made that point when we were talking about this before, being able to incentivize it, kind of like a credit card. I think that's a really interesting piece to this.
Yeah, it was adding there the incentives to co-save, co-invest, co-insure, everything. How can we incentivize the parties? And I didn't mention that before, but also incentivize to get benefits for their child as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too. Great. Well, now we've looked at, right? We've looked at the Jolene side of it and what will help her access and manage, easy, convenient, flexible, transparent financing resources that she can trust, and then what that bank can provide them. So provide for their partners and banking employees, but also what that service can provide. So now I want to move to our last section where we combine all these insights, right, from what Jolene wants and what the bank can provide and what they should be providing. So here's where we go to what really can the solution be? What can we do? What can we create to hit all of these gain points that we've talked about? or some of these gain points. So I'm going to set the timer here for 4 minutes, give us a little bit more time to really brainstorm what does the solution look like in the end and what hackers can start to develop. So I'm going to set the timer now. And start to think about that. So I know we were getting there before with some of this mitigation ideas or even collateral ideas, Pierre, that you had before. Let's bring those back and start to figure out that here. All right. Again, let's start to just read what people have put down and start to discuss. Any initial reactions, thoughts from what you're reading?
I really like the simple solutions that are emerging, like the push notifications at a life event scenario. Like, be very interesting to map what those might be or how we enable customers to self-select them like ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree. It's lacking the data right now, but at least we got the ideas.
I saw the data-inspired knowledge of customer and kid outcomes. That's sticky. What were you thinking there, Pierre?
So I'm thinking about so again towards life event and everything, and kid. I'm sure banks know a lot about what's been done for the kids, right? For other kids, in let's say living in a similar neighborhood or something like that, what parents are doing. If I could know, so I know that I'm doing the right thing, or at least what the majority of people are doing, that would help. Because right now I'm probably gonna learn by reading a book or with like some friends on my background. Maybe the banks have more knowledge than I do. Banks probably have more friends than I do myself, right? Especially in pandemic where you couldn't rely too much on other people because you didn't see much of them, right?
Yeah, so kind of this like community aspect there, like what others are doing, you know, pulling from that.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to just get aware of it.
Co-saving has a special interest rate. I think that's a great incentive and something interesting.
It's interesting because I see many of the post-its and they talk about accounts, like joint accounts, but with different features. So it's interesting that just by adding some features to some accounts can create the right incentives.
Mm.
Yeah, and I like the idea of that because that feels like a win-win. That's a win for the bank because you're capturing more customer acquisition, and it's a win for the customer because they're seeing a direct benefit to them banking together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also a couple different thoughts on this, you know, unexpected costs, like advice on unusual costs and then unexpected costs, as well as maybe like an emergency fund. So this like unexpected, how do we help support that? One thing I don't think we ideated on here is the how might we that we thought about on, you know, how can we equip and support partners and the banking employees to better advise customers? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because I'm not seeing that in this section that we were looking at. And maybe Christina, I can put you on the floor right now to maybe think about that, since you were thinking about how can we equip and help the you know, bank employee side of this to help advise. What are you thinking there?
You know, I don't want to like lead the witness, you know. I think like these. So sorry, are you asking me specifically about that sticky?
Or just more, you know, and when we were thinking about how we were going to phrase this in these how might we questions, we were thinking about also like how might we support those partners or banking employees to advise better. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are, since I think we went more in the direction of, you know, a solutioning, like that the bank, what a bank could provide, or a solution there, rather than like a solution to help advise or help support the bank customers. So I just was wondering what your thoughts are there, or, you know, if you were to ideate on that, what you were thinking there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, you know, the structure of financial advice is obviously, changing from being an in-branch only experience to being a digital and branch experience. And through digital mechanisms, because you're not necessarily dealing with someone face to face, there feels like there can be a lot of solution space that might be sort of more nimble, maybe. And I think when we're thinking about like person-to-person experiences, it's really about how do you create that matchmaking mechanism to know that, in the same way where you're finding a family doctor or a dentist or a therapist, as many of us have found during the pandemic, like how do you really connect with someone and really be able to trust their advice and know that they have your best interest because they know you. So I think there's just a lot of space for opportunity in investing time in solution, into like that dynamic between the person and the person, the two people in an interaction.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point that we didn't talk about, and I'm glad that you brought that up and we could put this in the section for hackers to think about, like a matchmaking solution or something there where it would connect advisors to the right customers and what they know. I think it's a really, really great point. Thank you, Christina. Yeah, and how to identify a customer with this need. JJ, really good point there too. Yeah, and how to build trust with that customer. If you're an advisor that really knows the space, maybe you feel like you can trust them more. How do you build that even further? I think it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I believe that most customers, when they interact with banks, they don't, or financial institutions, they don't expect their institutions to actually understand their situation. And I can see how a parent in this situation can have a lot of anxiety and a lot of stuff in their head, and having bank connecting, it would be a surprise probably. So you need to build a bridge for that.
Yeah, and just adding to your point there, what I just put down, like thinking about the underbanked community too, like a lot of the things that we were thinking about when we were talking about that throughout all these design thinking sessions is maybe the lack of trust that they have with their bank, right? They don't have that feeling. So how would that change and help maybe the underbanked community feel more supported too? Like their banks really know them much better than maybe they felt like they did before. Great. Well, any other last thoughts or questions about this before we close the session?
No more question here. I think that was really great, honestly. There's a lot of good idea coming out of it. I'm excited to post it on see if any hacker have time to pick it up before the final submission.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Christina, and please tell Anita we say thank you so much, for leading us through this, being our expertise in the space, and just bringing us through all of this. The problem statement was great. I wish we could have gone through every single use case that you provided, because I know that we had a hard time deciding which one to go with. So again, thank you so much. Thanks everyone on the call who added great ideas and input. And I'm excited to see what comes from it. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.